Okay. All right. So I really wanted to kind of focus on two things here. One, I wanted to show you just all of the cool things that are happening at Trestle and the changes that we are at KU and the changes that we've seen happen since Trestle began. But I also tried to frame this in a way to kind of help individuals see different ways that you can measure the impact of these projects at your campus. We're collecting a really broad data set here. And so it's just a lot of different quantitative and qualitative ways to look at the impact of this postdoc model in particular and the Trestle model at this campus. Sorry, again, my computer might be a little slow. There we go. So just in case you're not familiar with the Trestle model, I always throw this slide in there. The Trestle model is really a three-component model. So we work to support experts, and that's usually by embedding, for example, a postdoc or faculty who are our embedded experts. We even had at one of our institutions used graduate students doing their doctoral degree in education. They served as our embedded experts. The second step of this is to build community. And I'm going to talk about each of these, so I'm just kind of going over them quickly. And then the third is making visible evidence of that impact. So it's a multi-institution NSF project that's studying this model, different varieties of this model at seven different campuses in the US and Canada. So for the first common component, that department embedded expertise, again, I've talked to different campuses have done it different ways. Here at KU, though, we embedded postdocs. And so we ended up having a total of, I think, 8 different departments who had a postdoc. The majority of those were STEM departments, but we had math, geology, chemistry, biology, engineering, and then within engineering, there's a few different like mechanical, civil, and computer science. But then we also had postdocs in psychology and film and media studies, so it was opened up to the campus. And these postdocs work directly with faculty, so they're actually, they are experts in their units. So Kelsey Binning, for example, came into geology, and her PhD was in geology and geomorphology. And so they come to KU to work with faculty, and they work with us here at the Center for Teaching Excellence, to gain the content and pedagogical expertise. And we worked with them to really guide them in, how do you gain faculty buy-in and what are the evidence-based practices? A bit of that time just took teaching them literature. And then for community building, that's, just within and across departments. This also includes across the Trestle network. So here on campus, we had teaching fellows working group. So the postdocs would come together. So I think it was about once a week. And we would talk about different things and build a community there. In their own departments, they had community. We have a community here that started in 2013 called C21, 21st Century Course Redesign. And that had faculty from across the university. We would get together, we would talk about evidence-based practices. So the picture on the top left there is a picture from one of our meetings there. And then just across the Trestle network, now that we have this multi-institution model going, we've had a meeting at least once a year where all of these institutions have sent representatives and we've worked together to collaborate. And then this picture you see here of the 4 of us, this is KU, Queens, and UTSA. We all worked together and presented at the AACU STEM conference last November. So there's a lot of community building. And I wanted to throw out there, when we think about community building, so in 2013 is actually when we started the postdoc model here at KU. So we started the postdoc model here before Trestle began, but I'll talk about that in just like 2 slides. But just to show, you start with this community. So we started with the C21 community and embedding these experts into departments, and just how much that's grown since we began that at our university has really been amazing to me. So looking at this from different ways, so from C21 with our postdocs in their own departments have held book clubs. So like probably once a month or once every couple weeks, they have a group of faculty who get together and they have a book and they're talking about inclusive teaching, or again, just more evidence-based practices, what they can be doing in their classes and how they can support each other. In engineering, our postdoc there, Molly, has developed a working group, which has been really great. And faculty get together, again, usually about once a month, and they talk about different things. And some of our faculty have actually teamed up together and have gone and traveled to different universities to see really great practices that other institutions are doing. So chemistry went to University of Arizona last year. I'm trying to think of the other places we've gone. I think one engineering department went to Purdue and Valparaiso. So just really getting to broaden our network and see great things that other universities are doing. And building off of that, so I talked about how the postdocs had their teaching fellows working group where they would get together and talk about these things. Well, that's actually broadened out now too. We now have a sustainable group hosted out of the center. That's why the color changed to purple, because now this is an institution thing. This is called the Teaching Scholarship Collaborative. So our postdocs, and then we have, as Miriam was saying, we now have assistant teaching faculty here. And so they get together along with lecturers and just anyone interested in SOTL or DBER research. We get together once a week, once every 2 weeks to talk about that. Out of C21, so starting about 2015, in addition to just that C21 community, we started providing mini grants, course transformation mini grants, and that's really blossomed. That's been going on for several years now. At the end of every spring semester, we have a celebration of teaching or a poster reception event. And this year we had over 50 or 60 posters, and the room that we were in was packed. There are probably like at least 150 or 200 people that were there. We have donors who are seeing what we're doing, and so we were able to build a new thing called the Curriculum Innovation Program. I could talk more about that in a little bit if you want. And teaching demos, that was a thing actually that came out of a trestle meeting and was so popular that we started implementing that here. So faculty submit cool things that they're doing, and then they demo it for the entire community to see. And then lastly, these are 3 different projects. But I just wanted to kind of point them out because these are, STEM analytics and benchmarks is another NSF funded project. But these are groups of faculty across campus working together on course transformation ideas. And a lot of these people that are in these groups either started in C21 or they come back and forth. And then we do class observations that I'll talk about COPUS. So it's really, it's just amazing how much it's blossomed in just a few years, this community starting with C21. And I saw that I had a chat, so I'm gonna, okay. Dia was telling me when we did teaching demos before that too in the C21 community. Thank you for reminding me about that. And then when we talk about visible and accessible evidence, so this isn't just about, publishing necessarily a successful project or research that you've done in your class. This is also just focusing on like sharing with the community what you're doing. And so we do that different ways. I talked about the celebration of teaching or our poster session. This is a chance for people who've gotten mini grants or who've done other work with groups in our department to show what it is that they did in their class. And like a lot of times they come in there and it's not necessarily that I was successful, but it was something that they tried and something that they're going to tweak, and a chance to get feedback from their colleagues on what they want to do next. We also have poster sessions and case studies and lots of workshops at the Trestle meetings. So that's been a great avenue for people to share what they've been doing. What you're on right now, our Colloquium and our Brown Bag series, that's another way for people to share strategies that they've implemented. And then we also now have a Trestle website. Well, not now. We've had a Trestle website for the past 2 or 3 years. And on that, when you go look at the network, you can actually see examples of courses that the postdocs or the embedded experts have worked on and the results that have come out of it. And just as a highlight, our new graduate research assistant, he's going to be revamping the website this summer. So it'll look a little bit different, and hopefully we'll have those resources more prominently highlighted at the very beginning for you. So any questions on that model before I continue on?
Can you tell me what kind of money flows into all this?
Money?
Yeah.
Yes, so that's always one of the first questions that I get. So this is all built off of, or based off of the SEI model and the Carl Wyman Science Education Initiative. And so at UBC and at Colorado, there was a large influx of resources that went in there, right? It was millions of dollars over 5 to 10 year timeframes. Here at KU, if you wanted to get a postdoc, Basically, there was a process, and I have a slide at the very end that I can go to, but departments had to submit a proposal, and they had to do that partly to gain buy-in, and if they were awarded it, they were given $250,000. And usually what that was used for was to hire a postdoc for a 3-year time period. So still a chunk of money there, but nothing in comparison to the millions of dollars that was input with the other models. And we're seeing really, I'll show you, really great results from it still. And I think Dia's gonna chime in there. I saw her unmute herself.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, KU has had 8 total postdocs. So total university investment in the postdocs is $2 million. And about 4,000 a year to support C21 and the things that we did through that. So probably 2,100,000 is what the university has put into it, and then the Trestle grant has supplemented it, and Blair's going to talk about that.
Okay, great question. I told Dia, I was like, I always get that question first. Just how much money does it take? So how Trestle supported KU. So as I said, our postdoc program started before Trestle actually began in fall 2015. So the university was already supporting the postdoc program. So we had a total of 8 postdocs for 3-year terms. The C21 community had already been established, and the poster session had really already been established. And then personnel support. So we already had graduate students, I was one of them actually, who were brought into CTE to help plan and build that C21 community and to assist the postdocs in their work. But when Trestle was awarded, it really, really grew. So we had the course transformation mini grants that we started awarding every year. And for those course transformation mini grants, we give out between $20,000 to $25,000 each year. Hold on, Diaz. I see you smiling. Do you want to correct me? You have to unmute.
Sorry, my mute button was hidden. I'm sorry. I thought you were saying 20 to 25,000 for the grants each.
Oh, no. Total each year, it's about $20,000 to $25,000 that we've given out.
From the Trestle grant, it's 10,000 a year, and then we supplement center funds, so it might get closer to 25 depending. So
yeah. And then the size of those grants is about $1,500 to $3,000, depending on the proposal and the number of faculty working on it. With Trestle, we were also able to provide those travel grants. So I talked about those teams of faculty being able to travel to other universities to see what they're doing. Trestle funded that. Obviously, the opportunities to participate in the Trestle network, COPUS observations and other assessments. So I'm going to show you some COPUS data in just a few slides, but this is classroom observation data. It's more quantitative in nature. And we've had, oh man, the number's really risen. So over the past 3 semesters, I think on average, we've had about 35 class courses that we go in and observe each semester, 3 to 4 observations per semester. So, and then again, personnel support for the postdoc training. So continuing to have grad student support, but that also includes my position as well as the undergraduates that we hire to do the COPUS observations. So Trestle really, really enhanced that program overall. And then I just threw in this timeline real fast before I show you some examples of the data, because I feel like that might have been a little overwhelming what I was saying. So everything began for the postdoc model beginning in fall 2013 here. So we had postdocs in biology and geology at that point. And that is when our C21 community started. And then over the years, we added in more postdocs. So in 2014, we had postdocs in psychology, engineering, and film and media studies began. And in 2015, postdocs in math and chemistry began. So fall 2015 is when the Trestle intervention began. And I just put a little star here just to show you, it says TS. That starting in spring 2016, we actually had a new position form at KU, the teaching specialist position. And so that is for, that is a faculty type position where, again, the main emphasis of their position is to teach and to work with faculty. And so that has now evolved into those assistant teaching professor positions that I talked about at the beginning. We've had 4 trestle meetings. 2 have been held here at KU, and then 1 at Colorado and 1 at Indiana. And so the intervention period has pretty much ended as of this semester. And then we're beginning our project evaluation period going forward. All right, so how are we measuring impact? So obviously one of the first things we look at is what, how many courses and how many faculty have our embedded experts worked with. So with the number of postdocs that we've had about 10 departments actively involved with them. So again, we had 7 or 8 postdocs, but within engineering, that School of Engineering, she worked with mechanical engineering, computer science, and civil and environmental engineering. Overall, we've had over 40 courses that have been directly impacted by one of our embedded experts, and 40 faculty that have worked alongside them. So in just a, 6-year period, that's a really, really huge impact in my opinion, and that's grown steadily. And I went and looked through all the numbers. So this was actually a really exciting number to pull up. I looked at the enrollments of these courses that these postdocs have impacted. And through fall 2018, that's over 22,000 students. And the changes that these postdocs have made, for the most part, have sustained over time. So it isn't just, those select students. The whole point of this is that they would work with faculty and that these changes would stay and sustain over time. So the students, that number would really grow over time. Another thing we've been doing is all campuses, we've been gathering reports on what's been happening in the classes. So just looking at some KU data here, we've been using this to kind of gather, what specifically are the faculty and postdocs doing together. One of the big things that really started here was just having faculty work on, what are the course level learning goals, right? That's our first step when we talk about transforming our classes. But since we're dealing with STEM, another thing that's been really, really popular, as you can see on our campus, is in-class worksheets. In-class worksheets and group work has really stood out as something that has been popular, as well as starting to incorporate pre-class activities, making sure students that are coming to class prepared, and a little less emphasis on post-class activities. We've also been looking at the types of assessments that these courses are using now, and it's been exciting to me to see more STEM classes implementing student projects. When I was a STEM student, that was my favorite thing, was being able to work on a project and apply the knowledge I was doing in my class. And we just have a general other category of assessment right now, and I really need to sit down and break that out, because some of the unique evaluators that the faculty are using here are really worth highlighting. And so these analyses will be really nice over time to be able to look at, institution by institution. Did we focus on different things? We can also look at this in terms of, did computer science at Indiana, were they focused on the same things that maybe computer science here at KU was focused on? And we can start to tease out things like, for example, TA training. So we can see that engineering and psychology here emphasize a lot more on developing materials for TA training, both undergraduate and graduate level. And that's because they have a lot more classes where undergrad or grad students teach the courses. So that was a bigger focus for them there. Going back to those classroom observations, so COPUS is one of my favorite things now. If you're not familiar with COPUS, let me know. I'll send you the paper that describes it. But basically, you go into a class, and every 2 minutes, you record what's been happening in the class. There's like 12 codes for students and 12 codes for instructors. So we've been collecting data on this campus since spring 2016. So what you're looking at is data from spring 2016 through fall 2018. And I've been categorizing the codes between lecturing, so just when an instructor is at the front of the classroom presenting material to a class, versus the amount of time that students are actually spending working in a class. And this can be working on worksheets, answering clicker questions, making predictions, all those things. And you can see that all of these classes as a whole, so we have 186 individual courses. 113 of these are considered targeted. So these are classes that our postdocs have worked with. And then 73 are considered comparisons. So again, just classes that our postdocs have not worked with. And you can see that there is a significant difference between the amount of time classes, the amount of time their instructors are lecturing in classes between the targeted and comparison groups, as well as a significant difference between the amount of time students are working between our targeted classes and our comparison classes. So that was a really, I think this is a really great tool to kind of capture exactly what's happening in a class. And it's really a nice way of representing that our postdocs are doing a really good job of working with faculty to really emphasize our evidence-based practices, which is to get students doing and practicing the materials in class there with the instructor. I've kind of just broke this down as well by semesters. So I've been tracking this over time. So on the left-hand side of your screen is our spring semesters, and the right-hand side of our screen is our fall semesters. Top level is the time lecturing. Bottom level is the amount of time students spend working. I break these up by semesters only because a lot of our classes, a course is only taught in the spring and only taught in the fall. So I feel like it's easier to kind of track that progression. So for example, with lecturing over here in the fall, you can see that for our targeted courses, it's been dropping over time for our targeted courses, but also interestingly, it's also dropping for our comparison courses. And then vice versa for time spent student working. For both groups actually across time, we're seeing students working more in the classroom. And so one thing to consider is that even though some of these comparison courses, they aren't directly working with a postdoc, they are still maybe participating. Maybe they've gotten a mini grant to do something in their class, or they've been a part of the C21 community. So they are starting to implement or try different ideas that they've heard, and we're seeing that effect. So a next step of this will be for me to break down these classes and say, okay, we have classes who worked with a postdoc, but what about faculty who've been engaged with CTE, for example, in some capacity, and how does that look? Okay, going back to me.
Hey, Blair.
Yes, I see some questions. Okay. So can you explain what you mean, match the comparison classes? Oh, is that the access question?
Asking two different questions. One is, how do you match them with their correct comparison course, something of the same size? Because on our campus, we tend to have our most young assistant professors of teaching handling the very largest classes.
So here, and let's see, this is all of our departments. Our comparison courses, all of these courses range. So for the most part, our targeted courses generally are generally courses that are 100 to 300 level in size, or 100 to 300 level, although there are a handful of 400, 500 level mixed in there as well. And for our comparison courses, I've just tried to keep it at that level. So 100 to 300 level courses, large enrollment, if possible, and just in the same departments. I've gotten really lucky in some regards, and where I've been able to observe classes like the same class, but taught by one instructor working with a postdoc, and taught by another instructor not working with the postdoc. So I do have some more direct comparisons, or just at department level. Here's an example of 300 level classes. One's working with the postdoc, and one isn't. Same enrollment size. So we matched to the best we could, but it was mostly by course level and enrollment.
And all the faculty who are in the comparison groups, they're happy to have you come into the classroom, even though they don't buy in enough to actually do it themselves, or?
Actually, I get the most buy-in when I send, so the COPUS observations, I should say, at the beginning of every semester, I invite any STEM faculty to participate in the COPUS observations. So we're not singling anyone out. The invite goes out to everyone teaching a STEM course. And so they kind of know, and like we are very upfront, this is for an NSF project. I get the most buy-in, actually, if people respond and being like, yeah, sure, I'll do anything for NSF. Like, come in and view my course, which is really cool. But an element that we added after the first year is we don't just take the data and hide it. We write up reports and show the data and send it back to the instructors afterward. And, tell them, hey, if you have any questions about this, I'm willing to meet with you. I'm willing to talk about this. I haven't had too many faculty take me up on that, only a handful, but they're actually pretty curious when they see that and just kind of, oh, well, what does it mean if I was, I didn't think I was spending 70% of the time lecturing, but it really looks like I was. So maybe this is something I can think about in the future. It just gives them an opportunity to reflect. And these codes are meant to be as non-judgmental as possible. There really shouldn't be any, hopefully they don't take anything as judgmental when they read them. They're designed to not be that way. So I think that's kind of why we've actually had faculty who use them for their evaluations. They put them in their P&T packet materials. So when you talk about them in that positive light, we get a lot more buy-in.
Well, and we do, I think we hear from the postdocs that when the faculty get them, faculty that are in departments that have postdocs will often take it to the postdoc to talk about it. So I think that's an interesting interaction, right, between this, it's like a very mild intervention, even for somebody in the comparison group, but that can become a bigger intervention if there's a postdoc in this more organic way. But the other thing I wanted to point out, Blair, I don't know if you mentioned this or not. If you did, I missed it. The comparison classes are actually on average smaller than the ones that are targeted for transformation. So a lot of the things that we see are sort of in the opposite direction of what you might expect. So the nature of the comparison classes kind of works against some of the patterns that we're seeing, which I think in some ways makes our findings a little more compelling.
And then let me make sure I got your, yes, I've been having a lot of fun playing with these data sets and looking at correlations. Gosh, it's been a while since I looked at, Dia already kind of answered that question. We know that the enrollment is different on average between the targeted classes and the comparison classes, but being in that the targeted classes generally have a larger enrollment. And I have this data for the DFW rates, but I cannot remember the numbers off the top of my head for the COPUS observations, but I can send you what I've done
cool.
if you want. Any questions on COPUS? Sorry, it's hard to look at.
Actually, can I just ask a logistics question about how do you pay for, are you having undergrads do the actual observations?
Yes.
Do they get credit for it or are they getting paid for it?
They're getting paid for it. So that was one of those trestle enhancements at the project. For 5 years, we have funds to pay for undergrad observers. We've had about 3 to 4 observers each year. And even then that sometimes is not enough. I'll go in and do an observation every once in a while. I have graduate students, the graduates who help out with C21, they're also trained so that if we need backups, they step in. But yes, for the most part, undergraduates do it for us. And it's a pretty quick and easy training. If you ever needed materials for that, we've put that together here. So
great, thank you.
Now. Yeah. All right, so one of the big things I've been looking at in particular, though, is thinking about student success in these courses. So what impact is this postdoc model having on student success on our campus? And so one of the ways I've been trying to evaluate that is looking at the drop failure withdrawal rates, or the DFW rates, in these different courses. And so obviously I'm keeping everything anonymous, but I'm showing you 2 examples here of the trends that represent the trends that we're seeing since we implemented this project. So on the left-hand side here, you have a comparison course. All of my data is from about 2006 and on. I was trying to get at least a 10-year, or more than 10-year. I was going from like a 10 to 12-year span, so we can kind of see what that baseline was and then how it's been changing. So our comparison course on the left side is a pretty representative example of actually DFW rates were fairly stable, but now they're increasing over time. Versus on the right side here with one of our targeted courses, the DFW rates were high, but pretty variable, but to date they've been dropping over time. And they've been sustaining, you can see, for a few semesters at 5% or less. And so I'm going to expand on into this, but just to be clear, because I didn't explain that, the blue dots on each of these represent the DFW percentages. And then this faded area plot in the background is just showing you the enrollment of these courses, because that was also one of the questions I was getting, is, well, perhaps enrollment or something is driving this or dropping it. But as you can see, enrollment's gone up at the university, but it's really not impacting what we're seeing with the DFW rates.
Can I ask a question about your targeted courses?
Yes.
So one thing I've observed is that students will sign up for my course, and I have a lot of different types of formative assessment, and they do quizzes, they're supposed to read ahead of time, and after the first couple lectures they see it's going to be more work than my colleagues where you just show up, listen, and take a multiple choice exam. And so I have a fair number of drops before you would consider an actual drop rate. So it's during that shopping around period in the first week or so of the classes. And so I'm wondering if
data does not capture the early drops.
I'm wondering if that's kind of what's going on here, though. They're self-selecting for students that are willing to try to do the work that the professor is proposing in the targeted classes. And it's pushing others into the other courses where it seems easier, of course.
Most of the classes don't have concurrent offerings in another format. So actually, in order to get a postdoc, the department had to, at least in theory, commit to offering all sections or all offerings of that course in a transformed way. The exception is engineering, and then we have some exceptions in non-postdoc departments. But almost all the classes, there wouldn't be an alternative for those students to.
Even in a different semester.
There are maybe a few where they could do it in a different semester. But those, Blair, would you agree? I mean, those situations are pretty rare. And
pretty rare. There's one department that I can think of where I think that may have happened to some extent, but
it does suggest, I mean, it's an interesting idea if there's some other measure of how those students are, if we could get something like high school GPA or test scores, we might be able to in some ways address that. That
might even be something you can just pose to the registrar too, is, how many students dropped by this date in class. I think that's a really interesting, absolutely a very interesting question.
I mean, some of their moving around is because some of their classes are impacted, right? And they can't change it. But I get the strong sense some of them are showing up and they're like, ooh, I have to read ahead of time? No way.
Yeah. And so for us, that's just, we don't have a fair test of the impact of that, I think, because part of the intervention was to prevent that from happening. We knew that would happen. And so the whole program was designed in such a way that to minimize the likelihood that students would have alternatives. Because it also changes their attitude about if there is something and they have students that are taking the same course with somebody else with very different expectations, that's a very challenging dynamic in which to be transforming a course or taking a transformed course. So we just try to prevent that in the first place.
So what you're looking at here, this is two different departments, showing you an example of a representative comparison course versus a targeted course. I talked a little bit about before. This is actually an example of, this is the same course, but taught by two different instructors. So instructor A on the left is actually working with the embedded experts, whereas the instructor on the right, instructor B, is not working with the embedded expert on the right, or not working with the embedded expert. And you can see that the DFW rates have maintained below 10% for our instructor who's engaging with the postdoc, whereas our instructor who is not, again, in the same course, those DFW rates are actually rising up over time. And I think one thing, go ahead.
It's just recapitulating the increase in enrollment over time. Are these increasing DFW rates? It's not because of the instructor necessarily. The size of the course is going up, maybe?
So if you look at, so this is the same as this department here.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that unit, enrollment's been pretty stable since about 2008, 2009. But I don't have those numbers on there, so I can't answer that one specifically for you. I didn't show enrollment on these two. But anyways, sorry, I always get looking back at my notes. On this one, I really just wanted to kind of emphasize a question I would love to really explore looking at this is, one, this is based on teaching practices, but two, after we've been doing this for a certain amount of time, students become familiar to these practices. And I wonder if there are students who actually appreciate and enjoy the type of work they're doing in these classes. And so I wonder if there's any relationship at all to higher DFW rates, perhaps being somewhat linked to student resistance. Like maybe they actually don't want to just go in and sit there and listen. Maybe they want to be engaged. So that is like a future project that I want to explore one day when I learn how to be a qualitative researcher. So I just think that could be something maybe we pick out of here. So I'm seeing this on the individual course level. So the big thing I've been exploring here is, okay, we've got all of these courses. Let's look at DFW rates just between these two groups. So I've been compiling data over the past year and a half. And so far I've managed to get the drop failure withdrawal rates for 125 of those individual courses. 82 of them are targeted, 43 are comparison, again, from that time frame of spring 2016 through fall 2018. And so they're plotted here, comparison courses on the left, targeted courses on the right. And we are seeing a significant difference between the DFW rates between these two groups and all of those classes thrown together. So I think that that's a really compelling argument to say that something's working with this model, right? These instructors and these postdocs are doing something that's really highlighting and improving student success in these courses. So if we take it to the next step, I want to be able to look at, okay, well, we've got these DFW rates, we've got this singular measurement out of a class at the end of each semester, but I've also got these observations that I'm taking throughout the semester. So the next step of my research has been looking at, can we actually compare the DFW rates with what we're seeing happening in the classroom? And so you've got two plots here. On the top is time spent lecturing versus DFW rates with our two groups. So just to be clear, the triangles represent targeted courses and the circles represent comparison courses. And then there are trend lines. So the comparison course trend line is dashed, solid line for the targeted course trend line. So if I look at it by lecturing, I don't see any significant relationships between the two. But when I start looking at the amount of time students are spending working with my targeted group for this data set that I have here, I am getting a significant value looking at, for my targeted group, the more time that students are spending working, we are seeing a trend and that the DFW rates are decreasing. So I just think this is a really nice next step in terms of what we've been, all the things that are coming out about COPUS and how we can use COPUS to look at what disciplines are doing and how our classroom's changing over time. Now, potentially we can actually use COPUS to say, hey, if I go in and observe a class, we can correlate that to student success. So again, this is preliminary data, and I would like to actually lump in this most recent semester as well. But
Blair, are we pressed for time, or is it okay if I ask some more questions and just kind of probe the data?
No, absolutely.
Because feel free, I'm always happy to talk about it later. But I'm just noticing you've got then targeted courses that have 0% time spent working with students.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible?
So every instructor does, well, hold on, let me see. Students spend working, yes. Yes, so in my targeted group, we have courses that an instructor worked directly with a postdoc. But what also gets lumped into here is I'm considering it's the very start of the project, right? So starting in like fall 2015 or spring 2016, an instructor has just started working with a postdoc. So perhaps they haven't actually started incorporating any of those evidence-based practices. That's most likely what those represent. But then there's also the little trick of sustainability over time. So if a course has been changed by a postdoc, I'm tracking it over time. So if it's been 2 years since they worked with the postdoc in fall 2018, I'm still considering that a targeted course because I want to measure that change over time and if they're sustaining that. So it could be that a faculty member came in and reverted back.
It's also possible the faculty member and postdoc were working, at least in the early phases, on design and not as much, because they weren't always working on implementing active learning immediately. It's they start wherever there is and try to bring them along.
Yeah.
So are these dots representing one snapshot of each course, or are there multiple time snapshots of the same course over time represented in these dots? So if you were tracking a class for 2 years, that's 4 semesters. Are there 4 dots here?
Yes. And so in each class, we'll do 3 to 4 observations. I average the data from those observations. And then that's the 1 dot. And then it could be that this is, Chem 130 from 4 different semesters. Not necessarily the same instructor, but Chem 130 over 4 different semesters.
But it's an average number. Okay.
Yes.
And then I'm really impressed by all the 100%. How is that even possible?
There are, and actually in our computer science class, or in our computer science department in particular, we have one faculty member who I've seen that he's moved entirely to 100% students working in the class. All lecture, everything has been moved offline, and it's been a big success so far. But you'll see, there are comparison courses who are also doing this. So there's a good mix of what's happening on campus.
Thank you.
No problem.
Can you tell me what the axis label on the bottom is?
Time spent with students working as a percentage. Oh, another thing to add in there, Miriam, for you on the 100% is remember that with Copus, these are 2-minute time windows. So it says 100%, but it could just be that, for 20 seconds in that 2-minute time window, they did a little bit of work, and then there is some measurement of error in those Copus observations. But as someone who's tried to track things every minute, I can tell you it's not possible. It gets really busy in those classes. Okay. And then I just wanted to show, again, these aren't the only things we're using to measure change. We've also gathered the syllabus from all of these classes that we've done Copus observations for, or who've worked with an embedded expert. And I'm definitely seeing some differences in practices that they're implementing. So just in terms of pre-assignments, having students do something before they come to class, it's a significant difference between our 2 groups, or 2-stage exams has really stood out. Those have become really popular on our campus. And so pretty much only our targeted groups are using those. However, just one comparison groups using that. And I've been trying to, look at, okay, based on what we saw with our DFW rates then, if maybe perhaps pre-assignments is driving that, but no, those don't explain my difference between targeted and comparison groups. So I just wanted to throw that out there to show that I am exploring that pattern. And then right now I'm looking at course structure. So, using the grading scales that instructors have on their syllabuses, categorizing these into like a low, medium, high structure course. And maybe that can kind of tell me a little bit more about these DFW rates and what's driving that. So,
sorry, what would you call a high structure versus a low structure course? Number of assessments?
Yeah, I've been using the paper by Eddy and Hogan. I can send you that one. It talks about that, but I'm trying to build off of what he has right now. I'm torn a little bit on my definition because, a low structure class, for example, would be a class that's only using exams for their assessments, versus like a medium structure class. I kind of classify as, okay, they use exams, but they also have 1 to 2 lower medium stake assignments incorporated in that, or a high structure class, it's 3+. But what I'm finding is I probably even need to broaden that out more to say, if you just have exams and homework, you're still probably considered a low structure. And then I'm playing with my definitions right now to see how that maps. We're also collecting faculty surveys. So this is just a snapshot. I can't tell you too much about them. This is a 5-year project. So we just finished, or now finishing up collecting year 4. These are going out to 5 of the campuses. And they're collecting data on attitudes towards teaching, as well as having faculty self-report on what their teaching practices are. So this is just a snapshot of some questions in terms of, some teaching practices. What are you doing? Are you using real world examples or case studies? So we're gonna compare departments, as well as, looking at those targeted faculty on our campuses versus comparison faculty. But one thing I've been pulling out of that's been a really fun project, and Kayla on here has been helping me out, so I'm gonna make sure I give her credit as well. Some of the questions on there are open-ended questions that say, tell us about any factors that may be helping your own personal success in teaching effectively, or vice versa, that may be inhibiting your own personal success in teaching effectively. So I have been coding those for all the institutions. For the past 3 years so far, I've come up with I've made about 28 categories, which is probably too many, but again, novice here. And so this is just a representative example. Here's KU from 2017, and the two things that have stood out and keep growing in terms of responses is colleague support and institutional support. That always stands out as being the most, or at least in the top 5 of what helps individuals the most. And so I think that this is really good data that can be used just to present to the institution. Like, look, building these communities is what helps people the most to be able to teach effectively, or what they feel helps them the most. So I'm going to be continuing this project on. I think it's a really interesting way to look over time and see how people are responding. And so we have 1 more year of survey data to collect. We're continuing to collect COPUS and DFW data on our campus. The intervention period is done now, I think. So we probably won't be collecting any more course level reports. We'll just be starting to analyze them. But I wanted to throw out there, in addition, we also collect narrative reports. So these are qualitative reports that are synthesized by the postdocs and faculty members leading these department grants. And so we're going to be doing a deep dive into those. And if you ever wanted a template of any of these assessment tools that we've been using, like, absolutely reach out to me. I can send you copies of these. Yes, Miriam, I'll send you some of, I'll send you all of them. But they've worked well. They give us a lot of really, really insightful data. And so I recommend them for anyone to use. And that's the end of my presentation. And I think I got it right. 4 minutes to spare.
Claire, what are you planning for analyzing the narrative reports?
So Dee and I haven't talked too much in depth about that, but I think it'll be similar to what I've been doing with those questions, the helping and inhibiting questions, is doing more of a coding project. What themes and categories are emerging out of in terms of what the postdocs and faculty did, how does that vary between institution department, but I'm also going to let Dia chime in here because I know she has thoughts about what they want to do with those.
Well, I've been thinking, really, part of the purpose of the narrative reports is to get we want a lot from it. We're trying to prompt some reflection about the course, but it is also one of the best places for us to learn about the kinds of changes that the postdoc and faculty are seeing in their own course embedded measures of student learning. So we're reporting the DFW data, but it's really critical, we think, that showing drops in failure rates that we accompany with, or we combine it with data that show that the quality of the learning experience students are taking away from the course is at least being maintained, if not ideally going up quite a bit. And so that's one of the things that I think we're going to be trying to glean from the narrative reports. And we do have a rubric that we've applied to post representations of course transformation in conjunction with our celebration of teaching. And I think we should be able to apply that same rubric to the narrative reports as well. So I think we're going to look at a few different things, but I think the most exciting thing is going to be trying to get more information about the actual changes in learning, achievement of learning outcomes that are happening in the courses.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I just have just a general comment question, which is I'm just so impressed that you are able to transform a course and get multiple faculty over time to hold steady to the design of the course. Because we have, whiplash here, for some of our courses where it just goes from, when it goes from one faculty to the other, there are even topics that are not covered, right? And the idea is you can allow people to really bring out their expertise, right? You have a yeast geneticist teaching a course that also a bacteriologist teaches. Yeah, they're going to dive into case studies that are more on the yeast side versus the bacterial side. But we really can't even agree on, numbers of assessments or type of assessments.
Well, and so Dia, feel free to chime in here, but I think a big thing that has stood out here at KU is leadership support in this. And departments are doing it a little bit differently. So for example, in biology, they co-teach all of these classes. And so, if someone new is joining, biology and geology, excuse me. And so if someone new is coming in that's going to be starting in this rotation, like the first semester, they just have to sit in and watch these two instructors do this. And so they've really been able to build it that way. And I think a lot of it's just that once they're bought in that these work, I feel like maybe it's less of a challenge in terms of, I want to make sure I teach this, because then they've kind of sat down and identified like, this is what they need to know before they go into this next course downstream.
We also have to agree on whether you trust the measures. So for example, our new department chair of teaching is super excited because one of my other colleagues that teaches the same course as I am, he's gone to mostly case study based, and the students love it. They sit there, they listen to a really fun, exciting story, and there is a lot of microbiology to learn there. But it's not sort of, my approach is more ground up, basics and so on, and we really master those. So his evaluations are through the roof, and that's super impressive to, some people here, as opposed to other measures, So we don't even agree really on what's more important, and right now student evaluations have too much weight.
Yeah, that's not a very good way to capture learning by any means.
It's a popularity contest.
I would echo what Blair says about the role of leadership, but on top of I think even before you need sort of strategic leadership to try to foster the handover of practices from one instructor to another. There are things that happen in the early phases that are really critical. One is the leverage that you have when you have to put together a proposal to get the postdoc in the first place. We apply the same rationale to our much smaller funding opportunities like course transformation grants. So for a little more money for grant proposals that are coordinated, that involve multiple instructors, that involve a team working together. And we have done a lot of our programming and incentivizing around trying to get teams of people in a department on board with working on something collaboratively. And then we really try to have them start in the early phases with a conversation about not only what are the learning outcomes, but what evidence, are you going to be able to gather? Can they come together on what it will look like if students are achieving those learning outcomes? And so if we can get those kinds of agreements early on, then the rest of the things are sort of built in. So I think that's really been key. Is if a department didn't show that kind of buy-in and broad engagement in the courses and commitment to sustaining it and getting everybody who teaches that class to use these methods, they didn't get the funding. And then, what happened is there were some departments that didn't but maybe they got the funding 3 years later or 2 years later after they saw what was happening in some of the other departments. So I think you just have to find the leverage points to get the commitment ahead of time instead of trying to make it happen after. It's so much harder after the fact to try to get others to buy in.
I think a point you've made too, Dia, is that it makes a difference when they're collaborating with us. Right? CTE was an important part of, it wasn't just the departments got to pick who their postdoc was. We were a part of helping
Mm,
that guidance for some of the departments. But the fact that they came and engaged with us in the Teaching Fellow Working Group and they had guidance from this organization, I think made a difference.
I would say some departments relied on the guidance more than others, though, and that made a big difference. One thing that I would change if we were to do this again is at KU, the money went directly to departments, and then CTE and Tressel's involvement have added on post hoc as almost an at the beginning from the academic leaders that set it up. And so it did create some honest in terms of who are they accountable to. There were some missing pieces. I think, because we had good rapport with the departments, that helped. But yeah, I think if I were to do it over again, I would make a more direct line of accountability from the departments and the postdocs into CTE, close the loop a little more tightly on that. That would definitely be a lesson learned by us.
Any other questions? I know I've got over the 3 o'clock time slot, so I don't want to hold anyone over.
No, but thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. Again, this is recorded, so I'll have it go up on our YouTube page. So feel free to share with anyone you think would be interested. I always like seeing more hits on the YouTube page for Tressel. And if you have questions, email me. If you want copies of any of the evaluation forms that we use or just more questions about data, send me a message. I'll be happy to share.
Can you share your presentation?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I'll have the recording up there, and then I'll link up to the PowerPoint as well.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right, everyone. Have a great Monday.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Oops, I have to hit stop.